So, welcome everybody to this IFL podcast. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be interviewing a great friend of mine, Douglas Alexiou, who I've known for a long time in London. We were just chit-chatting before recording about the various times that we'd met at Royal Variety shows and stuff like that. But of course, the aim of today is to talk about Douglas and his work with the IFL. So, Douglas, just before talking about that, I wondered if you could just give us a brief resume of your career, because I think it'd be really interesting for people to hear about that.
Of course, Suzanne. Well, I read law at university, although on reflection, I think it might have been better to have read something else and then done law later on, which is what my daughter did. She read English at university, then she became a solicitor. Training contracts in my day were called articles. Mm-hmm. And I was articled to a partner in a firm in the Temple. Only a few years before then, you had to pay a premium to get articles. You had to pay to become a solicitor and to pay a firm. That stopped, fortunately. Anyway, I was offered the princely sum of £5 a week. But with my Greek background, I negotiated an increase of £6 a week.
I'm pleased to hear it.
But to put that into perspective, the outdoor and most junior clerk in the office, who was 19, was earning £20 a week at the time.
Wow, so, that is an interesting perspective. Yeah.
Anyway, this meant that unless you had financial backing, which I was fortunate to have, you could not get articles, training contract, and become a solicitor, which is quite wrong. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case.
Yeah.
My first job, actually, believe it or not, Suzanne, was as a conveyancer, only because I'd done quite a lot of that work during my articles, my training contract. But it wasn't for me. And I went to the Law Society, who had, I don't know if they still do have, a registry for jobs. And one of these jobs on offer was as an assistant solicitor at Gordon Dad's in Brook Street, Mayfair, in London. And I went for 2 interviews and I was offered the job.
Fantastic.
Which was great fun. At the time, the family division was called the Probate, Divorce and Admiralty Division, or as one unfortunate secretary typed on a brief to council, the Probate, Divorce and Adultery Division. I never lived that down. Anyway, after about 6 months, I was asked to become a junior salaried partner, and eventually, a few years later, I became a full equity partner and eventually senior partner, and I was at Gordon Dad's for some 30 years. Then in 2001, in my 60th year, I took on a new challenge and set up my own firm, Alexiou Fisher Phillips, or AFP for short, with Jeremy Fisher and Susan Phillips, who are also at Gordon Dad's, as were Emma Hart and Sarah Hannell, who also joined up. I was there for 17 years, Suzanne, until I retired 5.5 years ago, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time. Great experience.
So a real entrepreneurial spirit, doing that later in life to have your own law firm. That's incredible.
Well, it was a bit of a risk, but I don't regret it for a moment. It was great fun, and I hope it still is for those who are still there.
I'm sure it is. I've spoken to a few of them. Now, tell me of 2 or 3 career highlights.
Right. Well, I suppose when I was at Gordon Dad's, becoming the outright #1 family law firm in the Legal 500 was a highlight, I would say. Mm-hmm. The previous year, we were joint equal #1, but that year we were the outright winners, so to speak. And of course, that was a great honor really for us, a high point, really. And I suppose the other great highlight has got to be setting up Alexiou Fisher Phillips. I mean, it was a wonderful experience, and I believe it was and is a great success. So that's something you don't forget.
No, and also I think setting up a niche practice is more common these days, whereas it was relatively unusual at that time.
There were 1 or 2 before us, to be fair, and I spoke to them and got some very good tips from those who'd done it before we did. But quite a lot have done it since then, and I think, well, maybe it's the way forward. I think it's a great success, personally. Anyway, in terms of work highlights, Suzanne, if you want me to sort of prattle on a little bit about that, I suppose there are a couple that stand out. It's in the public domain that I acted for the Duchess of York in her case. And during that period, I made a number of visits to Buckingham Palace for meetings. And it was fantastically interesting and a great privilege to do that. Anyway, on one occasion, Prince Andrew said that after the case was over, we chat. We all go and have dinner together. He and the Duchess of York, his solicitor, and his wife, my wife Shirley, and me. And I thought to myself, well, I was skeptical as to whether that would happen, because people say these things, they don't always happen. But actually, it did happen. To be fair, it was organised, and after the case was over, and my wife and I, and Prince Andrew's solicitor and his wife, and the Duke and Duchess of York with themselves, had a wonderful and delicious meal at the Waterside Inn in Bray. And that was an enjoyable, unique, and memorable occasion. One other little snippet I'll mention, a visit to a Saudi Arabian client in France with Nicholas Wilson, QC, as he then was, then became a High Court Judge, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court Judge, now retired, a wonderful lawyer. The client actually sent his private jet with 3 crew to fly us out to Nice, and then a limousine to his villa for our meeting with him. And during a break after a non-alcoholic lunch, because he was a devout Muslim, we had a little chat and we talked about, what collections, hobbies and things. And I said that I collected and repaired old fountain pens. Nicholas Wilson then asked the client what he collected. And the client looked at him and said, money. On the flight back, we had the most splendid meal, a seafood platter with lobster, king prawns, smoked salmon, you name it, it was there. Followed by, I must just remind myself, a selection of cheeses, followed by a very rich gâteau and a petit four, which was so large I called them grand four, and of course wine, a bottle of Puligny Montrachet. What else? Anyway, it was a wonderful experience. And when we got off the plane in Nice on arrival, we were asked what we wanted for the return journey. And Nicholas Wilson said, we'd like a seafood platter, fruit de mer, and he chose the wine, the Puligny Montrachet. So he knew what he was doing even then.
Well, it sounds so incredibly glamorous. It really does. And so I'm now wondering about young lawyers listening to this, and I'm wondering, do you have any top tips for young lawyers?
Suzanne, I think this is a difficult one for me in some ways, because today's a very different time from when I was a young lawyer, which was a long, long time ago, as you can imagine. I think one of the tips I would give to any young lawyers, never stop learning and be a good listener. I personally always believed in detail, as those who work with me will know, and I was always very keen on recording very full attendance notes of meetings with clients, of court hearings, telephone attendances, conferences with counsel, and these detailed notes held me in very good stead on several occasions. I'd also say to a young lawyer, look, work hard, but make sure you enjoy yourself and have fun in what you do. It's no good doing something that you don't enjoy. I mean, I never, ever woke up on a cold February morning and thought to myself, I don't really want to go to work today. I know that might sound a bit odd, but really, I loved what I did. And I would hope to a young lawyer, make sure that you love what you do and enjoy your career.
I think I totally agree. For me, it's about having passion for the work. And if you don't enjoy it, don't do it. We're lucky and privileged to do something that we thoroughly enjoy. And that's so important.
Yes. How many people do you know who actually hate going to work? I mean, what kind of life is that?
Yeah. And in terms of career and life, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Well, I think I would advise myself to remember it's important not to take on too much work. No one likes turning work away. I know none of us does that, but sometimes you have to say no. And it's important, I think, to know when to say that. Also, I think I could have been much better at asking for money on account of costs. I was not very good at that. It's a delicate matter, and you have to be firm and look out for the warning signs if a client is reluctant. Also, be nice to all those you work with. I think sometimes when I was young, I was a bit impatient and wasn't as nice as I should have been, and I regret that.
Well, I've never experienced that, let me tell you. And let me just talk a bit about managing work-life balance, because you've talked about saying no to clients, if you're too busy. How did you manage to have a work-life balance, or would you honestly say that you didn't?
Suzanne, I'll tell you this. I actually believed I managed it quite well.
Good.
I really do. And I was fortunate first of all, to have a wonderful, supportive wife to whom I've been married for over 50 years, and without whom I would not have had the career I've been fortunate to have. I owe her a great deal. I think you have to be organized, disciplined, and have a routine. Now, for 18 years, in addition to having a busy practice and a family, I was a director and sometimes chairman, as you probably know, of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club.
Yeah.
Very demanding role, especially at the time because there were some financial problems. I had meetings in the city quite often, early in the morning with our financial advisors, late in the evening and early morning with the lawyers, the solicitors in the city. So it was quite a difficult time. So I had to juggle a lot of balls in the air. And of course, and this was the most important of all, I was a family man. With a wife and children. So I got up very early to go to work. But I always tried, not always successfully, but I always tried to get back for an evening meal with my wife and children. However busy I was, Suzanne, I always tried to attend school sports days, school plays, concerts, report nights. I believe I only missed one over the years, and I think that's very important. You've got to get the balance right. In so many things in life, it's the balance, isn't it? With work and play, family, everything else.
It is. And I think that these days, in some ways, it might be a bit easier because of working from home. So all credit to you to say that you were able to achieve that. I'd just like to turn now to the IFL, if possible, because that's what people are, the people listening are obviously fellows of the IFL and they're interested in that. So how did you first become involved with the IFL?
Right. Well, the IAML, the International Matrimonial Lawyers, as it was then called, was formed in 1986 at a meeting in the Temple, which was organized by Peter Gross-Hodge, to which a comparatively small number of barristers and solicitors were invited, including me. So I became what was called a founding fellow, and I still am a founding fellow of the Academy. Now, after the European chapter was formed, one of my partners at Gordon Dad's successfully proposed me as a member of the admissions committee of the European chapter. And in due course, I became president of that chapter. I had 2 meetings in Amsterdam, Netherlands, and Paphos in Cyprus. And 6 months after the end of my presidency of the European chapter, I became president of the Academy. I'm pleased to see, actually, that William Healing of Alexiou Fisher Phillips is sort of following in my footsteps, and he's now vice president of the European chapter. Now, before that, I was involved, actually, in a contested election for president-elect of the Academy.
Right.
I think this was the first time there was such a contest, and I don't know if there's been one since. Anyway, I was successful and became president-elect, and the path was therefore clear for me to become president of the Academy.
And you've spoken a bit about where you held your meetings. Is there anything you'd like to add about that, or do you want to go on to talk about the particular highlights from your presidency?
Well, I've mentioned the European chapter meetings. Of course, when I became president of the IAFL, as it now is, in 2000, from 2000 to 2002, my meetings were in Montreal and Berlin. And I was very lucky to have fellows in both Canada and Germany who helped in the organization of the conferences. And in fact, all my conferences had local people who helped. And I think without that, it's very difficult. And of course, you've got to have someone to organize the educational program. And again, I was very lucky to have terrific people doing all those educational programs for me. Anyway, they were both great fun, my conferences. The site visit to Montreal was particularly memorable, as the 3 Canadian fellows who helped me organize it took me out to dinner, rather I took them out to dinner, or the IAML as it then was, took them out to dinner. And one of them ordered the most gigantic lobster you have ever seen in your life. Anyway, he couldn't eat it. So the 3 of us, although we had our own meals, had to pile in and help this poor chap. And see he's no longer with us to finish up his lobster. Yeah, so yeah, they were my meetings, Montreal and Berlin.
Brilliant. And so just in terms of reasons for joining the IFL, you've obviously been involved for a very long time. What would you say are the 3 main reasons for joining?
Well, I think if you have an international practice, it's important to have contacts in countries where you've got a connection with your cases. And I certainly have found it invaluable to be able to contact a fellow in another country for advice and sometimes to refer clients. I've also been fortunate, Suzanne, to have cases referred to me from fellows in other jurisdictions. And I think, in fact, the biggest case I ever had was sent to me by an American fellow. So
Wow.
that speaks for itself. Yeah. Also, I think as a fellow, I've been very fortunate enough to travel to many countries I might not otherwise have visited, including China, Russia, Australia, South Africa, and numerous places in the USA and Europe. And I think the educational programs in all those and the materials provided proved valuable on many occasions. And I kept them all for many, many years. Yeah, yeah.
And I think also the camaraderie. I mean, I love knowing people in different countries. So I don't know about you, but sometimes when friends and family say, oh, we're thinking of going to such and such a place, you've always got a reference point. You've always got someone you can contact and say, can you give us some information about this place or that place?
Exactly. But you know, Suzanne, in many ways, the most important reason of all, and I've left this till last, of joining the IAFL is the wonderful friendships that had been formed over many years. And although some of those friends with my generation are no longer with us, I'm still in touch with many who are. And in fact, only a few months ago, my wife and I met up for dinner in London with an American fellow and his wife and an English fellow and his wife. And of course, there are many fellows, as you know, like you, from these shores. And of course, meeting them at IAFL meetings as opposed to, in our work at home has helped to cement those relationships. And I think that's very important too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So just in terms of the future, have you got any thoughts about what the IFL could be doing, should be doing? Any ideas?
I find this one difficult to answer, Suzanne, because the organisation is now totally different to what it was in 1986. I mean, it was then somewhat elitist, and that is no longer the case, and rightly so. I think IAFL should continue to try, as I'm sure it is, to recruit fellows in jurisdictions where we have no representation. I know this is not easy, and it wasn't in my day, I can assure you. I've thought about this. I don't know if there's any scope for any new chapters. Probably not. I don't know. I think it's important to try to get younger lawyers involved, perhaps a junior IAFL. I don't know.
Well, in fact, I think we're on track with all of those things, because I don't know if you know, Douglas, but we have got the Asia Pacific chapter, which is relatively new, had its first meeting last year. There is a young IFL meeting now every year. And in fact, I was lucky enough to go last year to Ibiza. And so that was, as you can imagine, a really trendy place for a young meeting. So I think we've got all of those things on track.
That's wonderful, wonderful to hear. I'm sorry that I wasn't aware of that before saying what I just said.
No, not at all, not at all. Just filling you in.
You're thinking on the right lines. That's the main
You're thinking. Well, at least we're following what you think we should be doing, which is brilliant. And when you're not working now, and please tell me that you're not doing any work, or are you still working?
No, well, not really. Not. I'm a sort of non-practicing consultant with my firm, and people during me. Obviously, I don't charge anything at all, but I've not lost touch completely. But what I tell you, what I have been involved in since I left is with a couple of charities. In fact, until recently, I was the chair of a charitable trust involved in family and interpersonal relationships, and I remain involved with that trust, but in a slightly different capacity. As it happens, a number of American IAFL fellows are also involved in it, which helps to cement that connection. I like to keep physically active. I'm fortunate enough to live near Richmond Park in southwest London, for those who don't know where it is, and I walk and run at least 6 days a week, and sometimes cycle as well. In fact, I was out there first thing this morning. Slightly cooler weather than we've been having recently, I'm pleased to say. I'm also a member of a local golf club, although I have not been there as much as I would like to have been. We have a house on the Suffolk coast on the east of England, and spend quite a lot of time there, particularly since I retired. Now, my family is very important to me. Our son literally lives next door, and our daughter and her family live very nearby with our 2 granddaughters. We see a lot of them. We also spend holidays together, especially in Suffolk. So we see a lot of our family. God knows why they want to be with us old folk, but they seem to want to be. We all love spending time together, Suzanne. There's nothing better than that. After all, I'm a family lawyer.
Absolutely. Well, that's a brilliant end, and I've loved chatting to you. And I know that everyone will really enjoy listening to this,
Oh,
Douglas.
it's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for all of the time you've given to the
Not at all,
IFL,
Susan. It's been a great
and
pleasure.
also, and also for your time today.
My
I'm
great
really
pleasure.
grateful.
Thank you very much. Lovely to see you again.
And you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.